So, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue our program. We have a very interesting panel discussing next on, and I would like to warmly welcome the panel host from the Finnish Business and Policy Forum, Eva, the director, Emilia Kullas. So I could give the floor to you and the panelists now.
Many thanks. And thank you everyone here present at the beautiful Turku, and also all the people that hopefully a lot of you are listening to us online. My name is Emilia Kullas. I'm the director of Finnish Business and Policy Forum, EVA, and I have the pleasure to discuss a lot of topics with an excellent panel we have here today. I'll start first, I'll make the introductions here. I'll start first with Ari Kaperi. What actually is your title nowadays? You're from Nordea, one of Europe's biggest banks, but what's your title? What are you responsible of?
I'm the English title is Country Senior Executive in Finland.
That's the reason why I didn't say that.
But then my main job actually in Nordea Group is being the head of credits.
Thanks. And then Ilse Johansson, we had the opportunity to hear you just before this coffee break and this panel, but Ilse, what do you do? I'm sure that one of your days at work must be very wildly, but just describe, what's the next thing we're going to do when you fly over back to Brussels? What's the next thing on your list?
That's a very good question. What I'm doing? So I'm Secretary General of the European Commission now, and General Secretariat is a presidential service which ensures coherency of all the decision-making and policy-making of European Commission. As you know, we have altogether 32,000 employees within the Commission, and my task is, together with Director Generals and together with College, to ensure that the whole machinery runs smoothly. That's one thing, and the second thing, of course, being on top of the things and provide assistance to the President when we need to take any kind of decision, starting from the leaking roof, ending with Afghanistan crisis.
Thank you, Ilse. So, tens of thousands of employees, machines that need to run effectively. I think, Pekka Tiitinen, this might sound a bit familiar to you. Pekka, could you please explain who you are and where you work?
Yeah, I'm Managing Director of ABB in Finland, and I look after its motion business in the Central, Northern, Eastern Europe and bunch of its country entities north of Mediterranean.
And just give us a figure of the scale of ABB. How many people are working for ABB?
In Finland is 5,000 people, a couple of billion, and then we had it multiple times when taking the European context to it.
Thank you, Pekka. Last but not least, we have Miriam Holstein from Bayer. And would you describe Bayer for us? I mean, people in Turku know it, but for the rest of us.
Well, Bayer is a life science company comprising 3 divisions, pharmaceuticals, and that is the area which is, I think, most known to everybody. Consumer health products, so you all know aspirin, Bepanthen, Berocca, which you can buy in pharmacies, and crop science products, so everything around farming, from pesticides, crop protection products, digital solutions for the farmer. And all, in the end, to serve our vision, health for all, hunger for none.
Thank you, Miriam. And then we have Leena Mörttinen. Hello, Leena.
Hi, everybody. Good to join you from Helsinki.
Yes.
Sorry I wasn't able to be there personally.
That's a pity, but we're still happy that you're with us. Could you please describe to our audience what you do?
I'm permanent undersecretary at the Ministry of Finance in Finland, responsible for the international and financial affairs.
Many thanks. And with these panelists and with you, audience, we're going to have a common discussion today. We have a bit more than an hour to share with us. I hope that you people in the audience that we really take part on this discussion and use the online platform, the chat format, in order to put some questions through. I'll see them here on my iPad, and I'll pick them up as soon as they come. I thought about we're going to start with three themes today. One is we're going to start with the key lessons from COVID-19. I think that's a topic that we can't avoid. Then we move on to another small matter of the climate change and how to best to fight it. And lastly, I thought that we're going to have a common discussion about competitiveness and trends in trade policy. But let's start with the pandemic that has changed the way how we live and work in profound ways, which of this seminar is one example. Secretary General Ilse, you also already described to us what EU's response has been to this pandemic, but if you should pick one key lesson Europe has learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, what would it be?
Actually, I would go for 3 lessons. But they are all very much interlinked. The first one, we were absolutely unprepared for this pandemic. In terms of command chains, information sharing, but also anticipation, seeing it coming. Second lesson, we suddenly realized that we don't have industrial capacity to produce necessary products because we were relying on many occasions on a single supplier, and everyone remembers we were lacking some therapies last year because we couldn't get them from India, and then we deployed all the necessary diplomatic contacts and so on. And the most important thing is the importance of a very clear chain of command, which we saw both at national level, where we find out that within the government people are having difficulties to share the information and to get the chain of command right, but the same goes at European level. And the last point is communication.
That was 4 already.
It comes 4 for 3 price. So
okay, accept that.
But no, because I think during the pandemic we saw a lot of mistrust to the government, a lot of disinformation, and it came from lack of very concrete communication and explanation what we are doing, and also admissions that actually we are learning. We don't have all the information. We are adjusting our actions while going because we just learned more and more about this pandemic. And this is one thing which everyone, both at European level and national level, should take with us for the next crisis, be it in a health sector or whenever else. So
we went ready. We were on the limits. We saw the limits of globalization in a way of global supply chains. We didn't have our structure of command wasn't good enough, robust enough, and we needed communication. Did I grasp those 4 points correctly? So I would like to hear your panelist view about this. Miriam, for instance, how does that sound to you? Do you agree on these 4 points or 4 key lessons?
Well, to start with the last one, the communication, I fully agree with that one. I think it's absolutely crucial in situations like this one that you are really clear about where you want to go or what the situation is. It also very clearly showed to me, and that is another point I would like to add to the list, is that we are all in that together. So it's not everybody working in their own silos, but rather we really have to work together and collaborate, and rather sooner than later. And just thinking about the situation, and that is for me still so surprising, and I would say a blast to see how quickly the vaccination had been developed. So thinking about that, it's also that science and innovation is at the core of all of that. And it makes it absolutely necessary to work together to come to such a result, to have a vaccination after a rather short time for something for which you normally need much more time. And I mean, you can break that down. I mean, that was the whole focus on developing a vaccination. But of course, this collaboration among the different sectors between public and private areas that went on in other areas as well. I mean, just thinking about our company, we supported in many ways. Like we supported through financial donations, donations in kind, whether it's products, then also supporting those healthcare professionals, which really, I mean, were at the front of all of that, and opening up the biomarker libraries to find the right vaccination. And I think that was a huge and great and in the end successful effort we all had shown.
Thank you, Miriam. Pekka Tiitinen, one thing about the about pandemic's effects on globalization, it was said, especially last year, there was a lot of talk about that this will probably disrupt the global supply chains. Since you're in charge of a global part of a global company, do you actually see this happening?
No.
That's a clear answer. I like that. Yeah. No, it's not happening.
Globalization will not stop here. And the value chains, we have seen that the value chains, even during the pandemic season, they are floating. There has been problems in the past, Bangkok flooding, earthquake, Japan. We also lived in SARS, early 2003, and we had to learning how you dislocate your people and they cannot meet each other. And one thing in the globalization is that, as you said, the sources are not in the regions. The sources are global, and there is currently, for example, the semiconductors lack of processors will hinder producing 7 million cars in the world. But those flows will not be fastly solved, and it is likely that the material will continue to flow in the world.
So it's not going to end, but, no. But will it change in some ways?
The redundancy need has also been in the past an important thing, and the redundancy need for different sources will continue, but I don't believe that the world will go completely blockages and there would not be trade between those.
Then I would like to ask Leena in Helsinki, and also this question will come to you as well, Kari. Let's focus a little bit on Finland. How is the Finnish economy doing at this point of the pandemic? If Leena, could you shed some light on especially on the public sector side?
Sure. Yeah, it's been quite a ride, and of course, when the pandemic started, the concern was great that the economy will suffer much more. It was sort of taken by granted that we'll have to do on a policy side quite a bit to ensure that the shock won't be too big. And luckily what happened was Finnish economy fared quite well. So the fall was only 2.8% GDP growth-wise, minus 2.8%. So actually now we are recovering quite quickly, and already the forecast from the spring is that we are growing about 2.6% this year. Of course, the forecast will be updated and the figures may be better. So we are gaining quickly the ground that we lost. But of course, we are in a completely different position when it comes to government finances. So the indebtedness is increasing. The public debt is about closing to 72%. And of course, by 2025, it will be higher. So we started below 60 and now we are approaching 75 slowly over the years. And of course, we are a country that has fared quite well. So there are a lot of European countries that have done much worse, and the euro area average is on debt to GDP, or public debt to GDP is around, I think, over 100% already. So Finland did well, but we have huge challenges ahead of how to normalize this. And this has to do with all the policy tools as well as exceptions and guarantees that are in place to take this down sort of in a controlled and well-done manner without sort of uncertainties accumulating into some sort of a crisis on the debt side is of key importance at the moment.
Thank you, Leena. And now, Ari, I'd like to hear your view on this. How is Finland's economy doing?
Thank you. And of course, Leena gave already this kind of big picture, and it's definitely what has happened. So that we have been hit naturally, but not so much, and the recovery has been faster than expected. Saying that, of course, there are obvious sectors that we have seen some very, very bad experiences. I'm sure that if Topi Manner, CEO of Finnair, would sit in this chair, he would give a very, very this kind of negative picture what has happened and what has been the consequences. But the big picture is that private sector has kind of recovered well. They have weathered this crisis quite well. We have seen the statistics, for example, number of bankruptcies not increased more or less. Nevertheless, there are small companies who have just simply, they have not gone belly up, but they have stopped doing their business. That's of course negative for the future growth opportunities. Households, they have a quite high consumer confidence that's visible in high investments, for example, in houses and flats. It's a very active housing market ongoing, so forth and so on. What is not yet happening, despite of the few good examples here, represented also companies in this channel, is this kind of corporate investments, so that they are still quite subdued, so that then there are still this kind of uncertainty definitely in the minds of Finnish business society.
But I think Miriam might have a point here about these corporate investments. Wasn't Bayer doing something big here in Turku?
Oh, yes, I have to recall. Yes, there was, of course, something. And yeah, a couple of months ago, or weeks ago, we announced a 250 million euro investment here to Turku. Our production site is being modernized and a new one being built, and all of that because we believe in our sustainability targets and need to boost them with the production site we have here. So we did that first step, and I hope other companies will follow.
Pekka, I think that was a point for you.
Yeah, we are constantly doing a lot of things around the world, so we perhaps cannot show a nice 200 million as our spread of the different things we do is so wide.
But how do you see, and Ilse, I would like to hear from your kind of like a pan-European view, the COVID-19 isn't over, and at least for me it seems to be a bit difficult. I can't pinpoint a time and a date, or was it September, December, or how are our lives going to be? When are we going to back to some kind of normal? So how does this prolonged uncertainty affect European economies?
I don't have a crystal ball to say how long it will go, because, as I said, we are learning about this pandemic. We are learning about this virus basically on a daily basis. And the good thing is we have seen it in our decision making while dealing with the pandemic, but also in economy. That actually we are more resilient than we thought initially, and we are able to adjust our decisions and our actions when new facts are coming in. And the same happening with economy. I think in the Commission we were really positively impressed when we went to the markets to start borrowing operation for Next Generation EU. We did it 3 or 4 times already. Every time it was oversubscribed 10 times, so there is a huge interest to invest in European economy. So that's a positive signal. But as I say, we are resilient because we are able to adjust our actions based on new facts coming in and seeing how things are developing.
Pekka, do you see this, does this COVID cause uncertainty show in your strategic thinking in any way?
Yeah, we don't. nobody knows when this is over. Most probably it's not really over ever. But if you look the previous pandemics, the Asian flus in 60 or 56 and the Hispanic influenza, which was about 10-20 times worse than the current one. The current one is interesting because the flow of information is so good. So there's a real-time information what is happening, which would not have been possible 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, perhaps the world would have taken a hit, really bad one. Currently we have the vaccination in place, we have the information in place. At some point the society needs to decide what is the balance of the risk and how much the society can be hijacked of the people who don't take care of taking the vaccination. We don't ban automotive transportation because it's risky. It's a tolerable risk. And what is the tolerable risk when the vaccination gets in order?
And Ari, how do you see this when you're talking to Nordea's customers? How do your customers kind of like, how do they assess this COVID risk or the uncertainty that we have to live with? Are they postponing their plans or?
No, say that we have not yet seen this kind of flow of investments, but coming back to that a little bit later. But actually, the business environment, they are already living the time after COVID. And that's part of this kind of why we have recovered relatively well. They have seen these kind of changes. These COVID experiences will kind of result to in people's behavior, so that there are these kind of permanent changes. How big they are, don't know, but people have changed their way of working, their ways of kind of traveling, their ways of commuting, their ways of spending money, their ways of doing purchases, their ways of communicating. And then all that has an impact on the business companies' kind of strategies, and they have to adopt. And that is perhaps now what is ongoing, that companies are analyzing this and what needs to be done. Of course, as we know, this has been this kind of leap in digital capabilities, remote, all that type of stuff. And then companies, they start to respond to that type of changed environment and customer behavior, and that is what they are now doing. It doesn't necessarily right now lead to these kind of investments, what we think in more traditional sense, brick and mortars, but it's IT, software, digital capabilities, so that is what will definitely start to be visible in due course.
Miriam, what do you think that will be the permanent changes of COVID-19 to Bayer? In the way you operate or the mindset of your people?
Yeah, I would also say that, I mean, what you just described, this can be seen at Bayer as well. And I think we started with that development already before the crisis, but the COVID crisis was now an accelerator for that development. And it was, I must say, it was really also nice to see how quickly everybody switched to this new work life, doing everything remotely and not traveling anymore. And there are many positive aspects connected and opportunities to that as well. So, for example, what will be very clear is that we will not travel as much as we did before the pandemic. So our budget will be 50% less in that. But also what you could see through these more using the digital tools, this is certainly something where you, where everybody has a voice, and you also as a large multinational company where people sit around the globe, where you move closer together and really do not focus only on one country or one organization, but really bring people together. So I think that is a huge opportunity which we see here. Of course, what we could also see, more general, I would say a drawback when it came to sustainability efforts. So this is certainly something, if we talk about equality or hunger. These are things where we need to take up the efforts again. But the signs we see, I think, are pretty encouraging in that regard. And I think we should always be prepared that something like that can happen in the future again. Of course, we can't prepare for each and every situation, but while having this agile mindset, I think that is what is needed.
And Leena, in Helsinki, how would you assess, are we ready, are we more ready for the next crisis? Have we learned something, or what should have we learned?
I fully agree with the speakers that have mentioned the role of technology. I think what we really learned is thank God we had it. Just as Pekka said, 30 years ago we would have been in a quite dire straits because of the crisis, but now we have a much better opportunity to quickly react, as well as to collect the data and process it quickly to understand what happens next. But of course, we are never fully prepared for the next crisis. And if all of us remember the financial crisis, that was, again, the sort of a black swan, wasn't supposed to happen on a global scale. And then we were hit by the pandemic, again on a global scale. So I think the fact that these are global will give us very useful lessons on how to organize, of course, within the country, within the member states in the EU, our policies, our legislation, our cooperation within the government, the decision-making processes have to be better, but within EU as well and globally. So all the layers will learn from this. And then hopefully this sort of more general learning of how to cooperate will help in the next crisis, which will likely be something else altogether again.
But we had the financial crisis for about 10 years ago. We had a crisis even before that, 10 years ago. So if we have a crisis in every 10 years, so we probably should be able to be a bit more vigilant when it comes. It wasn't a question,
yeah, absolutely, we should. But of course, I mean, how would you? It depends the nature of the crisis. So I think generally we get better. The way we react, the way we put together the working groups and deciding what needs to be done, we are better at. But the question is then, what sort of crisis? We had the financial crisis, then it's global pandemic. How do we deal with debt? All these things will have to be, they are always different. So the solutions to those crises may be different, but the platform through which we operate is much better due to the COVID and the financial market crisis.
Ilse, Arja, then Ilse.
To Leena's point, because I think that you said something important, that we have started to understand that these crises are global and we are also impacted. We all remember that when financial crisis started, at least we here in the Nordic countries, especially in Finland, we said to ourselves that it will not touch us. And that was this kind of opinion for the first 6 months or first year in the financial crisis. Then it hit. Now we were a little bit better prepared so that this pandemic, yes, it will also hit us. And thereby, this is perhaps the learning which keeps up this kind of agility. But the definition of crisis is that it's unexpected. You cannot kind of be prepared fully for the crisis, because then it would not be the crisis. So that always it means that when something happens in the beginning, it's a big fuss, as you will say, for example, explained in this pandemic, so that nobody knows what to do and get things together. But then I think that now our preparedness, whatever the crisis next will be, is much better because of the experience, understanding.
Would you, Ilse, kindly remind us one or two key things how EU is better prepared for the next one?
Just picking up what Ari said, you can't live in a permanent crisis mode. So things are becoming like a routine after a while. That's one thing. Second thing, if I just can comment what colleagues said, is also our lessons how to operate in remote manner are changing all the time. Initially, we all were extremely excited how we can do everything. We are not going to travel and so on and so on. 1.5 years after it, sorry guys, I'm here physically. I could have done it from Brussels, but you realize that you need to find a good balance. There are a number of things you can do remotely, but there are good occasions when it's worth to take an effort and go to the member states, especially for us, like an institution. It's important also to touch base. You can discuss a lot of things, and I have been spending time on phone over the last 1.5 years with all my colleagues in different capitals. But you go down, you get different feelings. So it's a good balance which we will need to find, and we are not there yet because also within the Commission we had our highs when we said, okay, budget for traveling and missions, 100% savings, so we don't need it. Everyone can go just video conferences. It's not going to work like that one. I think the main thing which at least we will be taking as an institution, you really need to think about chain of command and information sharing from day one. And I think that's one of the lessons we are taking with us.
I think the last point I'd like to make about COVID-19 is the vaccinations and the vaccination rate. And we in Finland have it pretty high, and in Finland in general we trust our authorities and we trust the medicines. But I think that if I, as a previously used to be a journalist, if I look at the COVID response through the communications lenses, I think that one thing that we haven't talked about enough is how come we managed to come up with vaccines so fast. Because now we have a lot of mistrust towards the vaccines because they came so fast. It normally takes, as Miriam knows, years or decades even. So I think that's my opinion, that we should have done more in opening up the process. You're free to argue with me on this one, if you like.
No, yes, it's true that vaccines were developed very quickly, but it's also true that companies, researchers, they didn't start from the scratch.
Yep.
So they were building on research on which was done. So and we were lucky that they managed to do. Second thing, and that comes to the speed of decision making, and we had it a lot with European Medicines Agency when it comes to the authorization. In our discussions with them, we had this debate. They said, okay, it takes 6 months. And then we went through the whole process without cutting any corner, because it's extremely important that we have a credible result. But do you need exactly this amount of time for each and every step? And then you realize that, of course, if you are not in times of crisis, you can do several things very slowly, but you can also do it more efficiently without changing the procedures, but just looking at the time frame. And within the Commission, we did the same. Why do you need 3 weeks for this decision if you can do exactly the same work? Okay, it required more effort from everyone involved without cutting the steps, but just compressing in a time. And there are things which you could do. There are things which you can't. Scientific research you can't squeeze. You need to take the time. But I think simply my point is that our researchers, they built on ongoing researchers. It's not that you just wake up in the morning and okay, now I think about.
Maybe to add from a science-based and research doing companies' point of view in that regard, it is, I mean, from a company who is doing research, it is of course of utmost importance that the safety of the patients and the people is observed. And I mean, this we do not compromise on that, this might be an impression which the one or the other person got because of the speed of the development, But I think we also have to see here that due to the crisis, everybody was really in the, I think you mentioned it earlier, in the execution mode, and not so much discussing about competencies and who is doing what, but rather getting things done. And this is, of course, a joint effort, when everybody is doing that from all sides, that we were even able to come up with such a good result in the end. But I would clearly say, I mean, these things are safe, and no one, I mean, I personally don't understand anyone who doesn't get the vaccination.
Me neither. And I repeat you, they are safe, so go and get them. But let's move on to another big challenge of our times. That obviously is the climate change. So we have EU's Fit for 55 and plan and the green transition. So the Europe has an ambitious plan of cutting carbon emissions 55% below 90 levels by 2030. And that's on the way to achieving net zero emissions at mid-century. I'd like to pose the first question about that to you, Pekka. What do you see? How do you see the pros and cons in EU's plan?
I think the EU's plan overall is really good that it gets in action and creates a program. The challenge in the whole climate change is that it is happening anyhow relatively slowly versus a human life. And then if people are suspicious about the vaccination in climate change, there is even more doubts that what is the time constant, how it's been done. And then comes the bigger financial discussions that how much does it cost, and the understanding that what is the cost if you don't do anything, and put that to the numbers, then you start to get it in balance. And then also that the climate change is not a European Union, that's a global program, and to have the balance that all the countries are there together, and the programs like the carbon emission cost balancing, that doing the investments which has the best return on investment, and not just define that certain thing is bad, because if you define certain thing is bad, you might kind of let the really worst things to still existing. So a common program and then European Union working together globally, I mean that the Kyoto Agreement and Paris Agreement, etc., are all interesting and nice to see that over the Atlantic also there is a way back for the common benefit of the mankind.
You already mentioned finance, but I would like to ask you, Ari, finance sector has already taken a clear stance towards all things green. Could you describe the effect the global finance markets can have on green investments? And also I would like to hear, because the coal mines won't disappear overnight, and there are oil rigs that still need to be invested in, what will happen to those?
Very good questions. And to start with, yes, it's right that to the financial market or financial system and financial sector, to be precise, they have taken this very seriously for obvious reasons, of course. First of all, it's important that we tackle the climate risk to be able to live in this planet. But then again, we have also kind of to be more concrete to the finance sector. It creates good opportunities even for the business, so that as we talked about, the nature of investments will change in the future. One trigger is this digitalization and all issues related to that. This is even bigger. We need to, of course, invest to tackle with this, and companies need to invest to tackle with this climate change and all that. But moreover, it's also for any bank, it's a very, very big this kind of risk management issue. So that then, of course, if you finance those type of companies which are not kind of adapting to these new requirements and supporting this fight for the global warming, then actually the future of those clients, we all know what will happen to them, and eventually If you finance those too long, then you face big loan losses. So that there are lots of these kind of angles why this is very important to the finance sector, and thereby this whole issue has moved from, to be honest, if I would say that 10 years ago we were already talking about this kind of sustainability and ESG issues, especially environment, but perhaps they were a little bit more these kind of words in the PowerPoint and this kind of little bit branding, image building. Now it's in the key of strategies of any bank, because this is integrated now in the operations. We realize as a finance sector that our impact is huge, because our job is to kind of allocate capital. We kind of attract capital from those who have them and then allocate those to investments for those people who need money for investments. At the European level, we are talking about, I look at the statistics, European banks have a loan book worth 15 trillion euros. That's where banks are making their own decisions where to loan those funds. But then on top of that, our customers, through us, through investments and savings, through our funds, they are investing more than 20 trillion euros through this system to those targets where they like to invest their money. And of course, banks are advisors there in between. So the impact is very huge. Then to your question that what will happen to the oil rigs and these kind of mines, I tend to believe that, yes, even if there's urgency in this transition, the true transition will take, unfortunately, a lot of time. Because if you do that too fast, you exit from those type of businesses and do it in the wrong way. First of all, it's not a kind of very responsible way of behaving as a kind of bank. But then again, that will have a huge impact on our kind of standard of living. Where to replace, for example, those type of products, those type that part of the energy which is then kind of lost if you do that too forcefully. So that I would suppose that I agree that the EU program and targets, they are good, they are clear, but they become very fast. We know that we should do all these issues fast, but then the reality there is that in a way this transition, unfortunately, at least in these most vulnerable industries, it will take time.
So there are kind of like two forces here. We have the EU strongly pushing policies towards all kinds of green investments, and then we have the finance sector and its customers who are also pushing it towards here. So basically, I think there's a big positive news here. So we are doing things, and we are doing it the right thing. So Miriam, what could go wrong?
I don't know. I mean, we just have to be faster. But I mean, I can only say that we fully support also the various EU initiatives in that regard. And I mean, we as a company ourselves, so we are also one of them, of course, who put sustainability on the same level as the financial targets which we have. And we have ambitious sustainability targets, just to give examples for that, for this decade, where we also said we want to be climate neutral in our operations and our operations with our customers and suppliers around. We also want to support 100 million women in low to middle income countries with access to modern and affordable contraception. So this is also one of those sustainability targets which go more under like social innovation, if you want. And there are a couple of other targets. And I mean, this is something which is, I would say, in our DNA, and we walk the talk with that. We also have that incorporated in our short-term incentives. So This is really something, I think, where we all need to do our parts, our shares, depending on which industry or role we are in. And therefore, of course, we do not know everything right now, and we are certainly not there. But I think these are the initiatives we just need to see and need to have, and even more.
The European Union is a strong regulator. Both pharma and finance is very much regulated areas of businesses, and I'm sure ABB knows has got its share of regulation as well. Where do you see regulations, pros and cons there? What's the good side of it? Does it create markets? How do you assess European Union's ability to create markets, or does regulation go too far?
Take it from the industry point of view. It's important that the European regulation development is in some sort of sync with what is happening in the rest of the world. So if it is a huge amount ahead of the time, then we might create here an unnecessary cost burden which doesn't exist elsewhere. And then if you take it not correctly, we might have a market that is old-fashioned, and the others are developing technologies which will take then over the European one. And if going back into technologies, for example, the catalysts came to the cars, or the sulfide oxide was not allowed when creating heat and energy because of the Schwarzwald forest problems, etc. So there are things in the past being done. This current one is tremendously much bigger, but it is also so that the refrigerators cannot have the certain materials because they create the problem with the ozone zone, etc. And getting the agreement on the global level, doing it the right way. And there needs to be a direction so that the companies develop them. And actually I feel that the companies are pretty committed. We ABB are committed to the science-based target 2030. And most of those, like we only purchase renewable electrical energy in Finland. Our cars are already, you can only have a hybrid or full electric currently. Already 1/3 is full electric, and every 1,000 new car in Finland is our company car.
I would say that it's very good that politicians, they have set the targets for this climate change fight. And then the regulators, they have set these kind of basic rules and making definitions and creating this kind of data environment for this requiring reporting and all that. So that in that way, it's very good at this kind of regulation, and politicians, they define this what. But now also in these environmental issues, in my mind, a little bit unfortunately, now in Europe, the regulators, they start to already go quite detailed on this how part. And I think that should be left for the markets, because I said that everybody is kind of feeling that this is vital, this is important, companies, kind of financiers, and then of course there should be this kind of little bit more perhaps freedom to figure out that what works, how to do this most efficiently. And then this kind of very detailed regulation is not needed. Actually, it may be a little bit even harmful if you go too deeply to this how part. And there are some this kind of signs that is happening now in this ESG side in Europe.
Lena, I would like to put the question to you as well. From your perspective, how do you see this kind of like this ever going on, sort of like a struggle with the markets and the state or the policymakers? How would you assess where we are at this moment? Who is stronger pushing the strings, the markets or the states or politicians?
Well, I think it's been extremely useful, the whole proposal on the sustainable finance, which has also resulted into EU being the leader in the global discussions on these things. So, I mean, there is definitely a point that sometimes it's just too fragmented and the common thinking is missing. Sometimes somebody will have to push a bit more, and regulators have a role there. Now, the point on being too detailed. I take quite close to the heart. It is true that if you go too detailed, you sort of rob the markets from its role of pricing the risk. And that's, of course, what we should keep in mind, that really we are not in sort of a planned economy where the politicians and regulators decide every nitty-gritty, every single detail and decimal. But the markets assess the risk that results from what sort of things we do now and how they impact the environment in the future, as well as the stability of the system, whether it is global, sort of social, or whether it is environmental or economic. So that is the role of the markets. But the initial push to do more has to be there. And I have to say that this is one of those, again, these completely global challenges where the bigger challenge is that we are, as countries, we are very diverse when it comes to our economic structures. And every single country has their own sweethearts and things that they use to grow on. And the question is how the sustainability thinking fits into that particular country's thinking. And that's where the difficulty starts if you go very detailed. And that's something that we may be experiencing in certain legislative packages. But I think the overall thrust needs to be there. And there needs to be a global dialogue and leadership. And of course, since this as well is a very human process, we need people to believe in a similar manner, and that requires data. And I think, go back to the thinking about what is the role of the markets. The markets won't be able to price anything unless they have the data to price it. And that's why there has to be a platform where you get that, and it has to be comparable. And then the markets will have to compete on pricing of the risk. So somehow the markets will have to come back on this as well, and they have a key role in setting the price of the future risk if we don't do enough in a quick enough time.
Thank you, Leena. Ilse, I think it's fair. Now it's a time for you to say some strong words about the EU's ability. You mentioned Brussels effect, and if I just define it loosely, when EU regulates, it also sets a framework for other countries to follow, and that framework is based on European values. So how would you describe EU's ability to get others to join in?
First of all, colleagues already mentioned that climate change is a global phenomenon. And we always should keep in mind that EU as such is responsible only for 8% of emissions. So even if we will get climate neutral and we will not get others on board, we are failing. Let's face the reality. So this global dimension and engagement with other countries, particularly with developing countries, is something which we take extremely seriously. And this is the basis of our foreign policy, of our development policy, and things which like 5-7 years ago was just a slogan that you need a very strong link between internal and external policies. Right now, your external policy is just a projection of our internal policies. And climate change, Green Deal, is one of the cornerstones in our engagement with countries around the globe in different kinds, with our development aid-based technologies. And here I think EU has this advantage, especially if we are the first movers. We can use this advantage that we set the standards and we set the technology, which will be needed for many, many countries around the globe. Having said that, I think we have also our internal challenge. We will be failing also if we will not make this transition just, and that goes to the direction you were mentioning. What do we do with all those coal miners? You just can't close on day one and not think what will happen in those areas, because we are talking about thousands and thousands of people who can't next day just find some other job, because you speak about the whole region. So it's a more holistic approach which is needed both when we reach out globally, but also when we think about transition within EU member states. Are we too prescriptive? You can always see it from different perspectives. Energy mix has always been member states' competence. I don't think that we are too prescriptive in a way how to do it. But we strongly believe that we need the targets which are binding, because you can't just realize that everyone will commit and then we will be there. You can always negotiate, but you need the targets, objectives where to go. The method and ways how to go, I think most of the member states have very clear vision. We see it also in national recovery resilience plans, where the whole plan is the whole philosophy for twin transition is there, and really seeing over the years how they will get there with the transitioning out of the coal mining and going into new technologies. And with this boost from EU side also by putting the targets and incentivizing research and development of new technologies. We have seen quite a huge uptake of electric cars. A few years ago, EU was really behind, and now we are in a completely different situation, and that's just one element.
So there's a positive change that actually has happened quite quickly. I think our last theme for our last bit more than 15 minutes would be about trade and about competitiveness. And I would like to ask you, Pekka, how would you rate Europe's competitiveness as an area?
Europe has a lot of innovation, but it is also having clearly areas, if we take the digital part, that perhaps was not on the top. It is the companies who create and private climate universities working together. We are a global company, so we are not dependent on Europe. Europe is very important for us, but we are actually all over the world. And it is the issue of the Europe. If things are not moving there, we might be doing something somewhere else, and the company might prosper still. I don't see that the Europe is hugely behind, but it needs to run faster, not to stay behind or become being behind.
Would you specify a little bit, run faster to do exactly what?
Developing new things, innovating, having a focus for the education, but also how the information flow, how to regulate in a positive manner rather than regulating it to the backwards.
Miriam, how would you describe the competitiveness, and let's just say pick a random country like Finland?
Well, I think, Finland is part of Europe, and therefore I think we have so many great achievements, the free movement of goods, of people. We have fair competition here, and these are things I think we need to keep up and also need to defend. And our markets are like, for ABB, we are acting globally, and therefore also our supply chains are going across the globe. Therefore, this is really crucial to us that we have an environment which spans across the globe actually, where we can really do trade and sell our products have an economic life here. And this is something where Finland, here in Finland actually, I must say, our investment showed it, that we think that Finland is a good place to do business in and to invest in. But Finland, I think, should also take that role within the EU and push these things even further. I think there are many strengths here where other EU states could look at and look at Finland, how we are doing that here. So from the healthcare sector, just having a look at the biobanks we have here, the health registered all digitally. This is not something you find so often elsewhere. Then also this openness to innovation, which is something which I think is crucial also to thrive in a country or in a region. And all these factors put together, I think, is something, if we could expand it even further to the EU and beyond, everybody would benefit of that in the end.
So you mentioned the movement of people and goods and capital as well. Leena, how would you describe the development on free trade lately?
Well, I think it's obvious to everybody that we are somewhat in a different world, although I think Pekka said earlier that globalization isn't over. Surely it is not over, but the nature of it has changed somewhat after the financial crisis. So we are more sort of in a geo-economic world where the huge economies look for partners and there is certain divisions between the countries, but there is still the values that we highly value in Europe, which is the free movement of capital and hopefully labor as well as far as EU is concerned. So the openness is there as well, but these are very delicate times in getting the sort of a global policy mix right, in that we respect the openness of trade. And that's something worth fighting for on a global scenery as well, not only within the borders of EU. So we have to think bigger than that in order to be competitive. But overall, I mean, I think the global scenery, you have to accept the fact that geopolitics plays a role as well. And I think it's particularly challenging for the companies to find the sort of right way to maneuver. But of course, I think still EU's role is to encourage the openness and this thinking about the strategic autonomy. We have to be very careful about it. It will have to be to hopefully our partners agreeing on multilateralism and keeping the borders open and sort of slow path back towards more of the globalization thinking rather than the geopolitics thinking that seems to be in the air at the moment. But we can't change the whole world, but EU is a big player. It leads by example, it sets standards. The climate change, the pandemic, it has a role there as well to bring people to the same table. And I strongly believe that the European model, although it's not highly appreciated necessarily by other large countries, we often read from our own newspapers that China dismisses as and it used to be during the Trump administration that Europe was not considered of anything important. But I think these things change as well, and we shouldn't think. Like we always say in Finland, don't think what others are thinking about us. We should act and change the views of people of how they see potentially of what we can do. And I think we can do a lot in Europe.
Thanks. Ilse, I would like to pick up a few words from Lena, what Lena just said. Strategic autonomy. Could you please describe it to us, how you see it? What does Europe mean when we have EU officials talking about strategic autonomy? Let's hear your definition of that.
Yeah, and we are talking about open strategic autonomy exactly in order to bring together those two concepts that we are not building Fortress Europe. And we don't think that we need to do everything on our own just in the European continent. But at the same time, we need to be much more self-assertive when we think about our strengths, when we think about our role globally. And we have seen it over the last years that we have been for a while quite naive, letting everything happen. If we just take investments, within EU for 60 years we have state aid rules in order to avoid that some member states can finance their companies more than others, so creating unfair competition. Just now we are putting in place necessary instruments to screen foreign investments, because on many occasions we know that behind those companies there are governments, Chinese governments or others, who are subsidizing their companies and who are buying strategic assets within the European Union. So it means for us strategic autonomy is to create the necessary conditions and necessary framework in which we are able to know what we are doing, what's happening, and that we are able to take our decisions absolutely independently.
Ari, could I hear how does this sound to you as a financier? This Europe's idea. It's not a fortress Europe, but how?
I think that it makes sense to a certain extent, of course, to protect yourself from this kind of unfair global competition. But then again, there's a risk that if it leads to some kind of trade wars, as any war, that's a sign of failure of some kind, and it has harmful, very, very negative consequences, because then as we have these global supply chains and value chains, then actually you in a way harm your own industry if you make these kind of imported goods too expensive as a component, and issues like that, or raw material, whatever it would be, and thereby you kind of disturb this type of competitive advantages of various countries, and where you naturally are efficient. So that it's a tricky issue, tricky area. To a certain extent, understandable, we should do something, but then understand that there's a big risk if it goes beyond this kind of control, and if we end up some kind of trade wars. But if I may still a little bit comment on this question of Europe's competitiveness, which was also the question, and agreeing with the colleagues who have said that we have all the opportunities, and basics perhaps are in relatively good shape in Europe, and also naturally in Finland. But actually the track record, I must say, is not so good, because looking at the GDPs in 2008 of EU, China, US, the order, believe or not, was that the EU was number one, US was a little bit behind, and then EU was 4 times bigger than China in terms of GDP. Around 13 years later, 2 crises later, after Brexit, now the order is naturally US is far number one, China and EU are even. So that only in 13 years, this type of real big change in the world economic powers has happened. And of course, Europe's EU's GDP is roughly at the same level, even in absolute terms, of course, including this Brexit or UK leaving us. But then it tells that, of course, if it just simply continue in this way, it doesn't look so kind of prosperous to the future. And then in a way, what are the drivers for any growth? It's this kind of economical growth. It's this kind of good ideas, which was already kind of discussed. Startups, growth companies, encourage people to try those ideas. You need to have a good, skillful staff, i.e. employees, i.e. good education, kind of even at the highest level of universities, research, all that. You need to have capital to kind of support that growth. And then you need to have access to the markets. We kind of have all of these in certain kind of step in or phase in Europe. But comparing to the China and US, we are not in any of these components. We are not even at par. They are ahead of us in all of these items. And then, of course, our job is to find ways to kind of not only reach them, but also go above them if we would like to retain this kind of real growth trajectory. And it's we don't have time, of course, in this panel discussion to discuss all of those issues, but actually, in a way, it's a little bit serious in my mind, these kind of structural issues we have currently.
Thank you, Aaron. I think this is, but Pekka, you have a point.
The size of the market is of an essence. And if you look at the market of the United States, it's a huge domestic market. And it allows the companies to develop without needing to deal with the export and things like that. China has become developing the thing. What European Union has tried to do in the past years to create common markets, however, there are certain exits and kind of a general opinion, it would be nice to be own national country, etc. That would be a disaster of the economy, because then these two giants with their domestic markets will have a substantial, huge economies of scale benefit versus the European ones.
Just two very brief comments. One on global supply chains and fair competition. Just remember, Chinese steel coming to Europe and almost killing the European steel industry. So was it fair competition? So we should be vigilant, and we should have instruments in place how we can deal with this one. On competitiveness of Europe, I think I see some positive trends when we see more and more cooperation between member states when it comes to joint projects and joint innovations. Because despite having single market for a very long time, we saw that EU companies, EU member states competing between themselves rather than joining forces. And now we see more and more projects which are cross-border with a great magnitude, which allows them to attract more financing, more science potential. I'm not saying that everything should be done jointly, but also exploring more synergies. And one area where we can see this one, which is relatively new for Europeans to cooperate, is defense. We started the European Defense Industrial Program, and I was really surprised to see that in both tenders we had 23 member states trying to participate in joint projects, also putting innovation together with production capacity, and that of course creates much bigger gravity. And I think, together with that one, we have to keep running, as Pekka was saying, not to be behind, because the world is changing very quickly.
Thank you, and I think it would be great to round it up to that. Just to put you to a last question, really short one. Miriam, if you should pick up one thing that Europe should do better, what would it be? One thing that you could choose, that let's focus on this.
I think Europe should continue focusing on execution, quick execution, and providing a good basis or framework for companies to innovate and to thrive with it.
Perhaps I link that to that chain of command Ilse was speaking earlier. Leena, if you could pick up one thing that we should focus on, what would be?
Well, being an economist, I'm a big fan of fair and well-functioning environment, particularly what comes to competition. So I think we'll have to figure out how to come in a global context, but also in EU, back from these exceptional tools of where we support the economy in a way that may be distorting, and get back to the efficiency side of things where the innovation is at its best. And that doesn't only apply, of course, to EU, but globally as well. That I hope that finally we normalize and find a way to, again, find the best technologies, the best people, and the healthy competition in the global scene.
Pekka, what would be your pick?
I think we should push further what Europe has been trying to do, get it more together, having an open market, and not going to take steps back of dissolving itself.
Ari.
Difficult to add anything. I would say that creating this kind of culture of nurturing innovation and supporting framework for that.
And I think we can all agree on that. Many thank you for all you, Ari, Ilse, Pekka, Miriam, and Leena in Helsinki. Thank you for you, everyone in the audience. I think our time has run up, so many thanks for this. And the discussion will continue on later on, right?
Yes, thank you also for my behalf. Let's give a warm applause to everybody. And of course to Emilia, which hosted an excellent panel, so thank you.
Thank you.
So next we will have a break, and we will continue at 14:15 with Minister Skinnari talking about the European trade policy and the future of European trade policy. So thank you from this event at this point. Thank you. Thanks.